After years of talking about how the slogan "Defund the Police" will hurt Democratic chances, and many Democrats backing away from any implication that they were going to follow up on the protests that were unprecedented in 2020, there's been some mixed news out of this election season about how much the slogan or any implication that defund the police is a priority for Democratic Congress members actually hurt the party. Some progressives have pointed out that folks like Kenneth Mejia, who was running in California, ran explicitly pointing out how much of police budgets, or city budgets rather, were going to the police, putting up large billboards across his district, pointing out the police had got $3.1 billion of tax money compared to homelessness, which was $802 million, transportation $342 million, et cetera, et cetera. You had Keith Ellison, a pro-police reform DA in Minnesota, winning his race. And folks are saying that folks like Val Demings in Florida, who was a top cop and really ran on "I'm gonna, fund the police harder," also failed to do well. Stacey Abrams got some critique for saying that she was going to raise police salaries, trying to pivot right on that issue, not convincing very many voters, it seems. What do you make of this, Robby?
Well, I always want to reward a candidate for putting up a billboard showing just how much money the government is spending. And yes, it's horrifying. We could get some entitlements up there too, maybe, but no, point taken. I don't know that I agree, though. Certainly there were some races where it seems to have been, and again, I don't know that funding the police more is substantively good policy. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that, and I don't know if that is also persuasive to voters, but the perception that Democrats are not taking crime seriously and that something has to be done clearly helped in the LA mayoral race, which is still going on. All these races still going on. It's very frustrating. Where Caruso, who's this Republican businessman, is winning against Karen Bass, and then there were ballot initiatives that are the tough on crime. Tough on crime ballot initiatives prevailing in Ohio and Alabama, where they restructured the cash bail a little bit, adding a dangerousness standard. So in Ohio, these won. The Ohio, they're going to be able to deny bail if the government convinces the judge the defendant poses a threat to the community or cannot be trusted for all sorts of things, kidnapping, murder, rape, et cetera. And then in New York, obviously, which was crime being really this defining issue in this race, and in New York City actually not having as many, even though it's been front and center in this debate about inner city crime, New York City's crime rate is not as bad as many other places, so maybe that ended up being a factor. But the challenger, Lee Zeldin, did come very close to unseating Hochul, the closest any Republican has come in a very, very, very long time by leaning into those issues. So I don't know that. I don't know. Yes, it's a mixed bag here. I don't know. You could be right that Democrats trying to sound tough on crime by wanting to fund the police more are just going to make everyone mad because they're making progressives mad, and then they're also, but again,
and Republicans don't
want more funding for government.
Right. Well, and also no one wants an imitation Republican. Nobody believes that someone like Stacey Abrams actually wants to ramp up the criminal justice system at the same time that people who want her to do the opposite are very irritated that she would even signal in that way and potentially vote in that way. She does have a history of, for example, defunding a very popular education program in the state out of compromise with Republicans in the state. So you never know what's possible.
But Hochul did pivot at the again, going back to the New York race, at the end of her campaign, pivoted so hard rhetorically to subway danger, and we're going to fix that. That was her final pitch to voters. Yeah. She leaned hard into that, and maybe that staved off defeat.
Well, maybe, and it also will be interesting to see what happens when people live under a mayor like Eric Adams, who ran on those policies and was successful in those policies, but continue to see trends in crime have no relationship to police funding or this kind of rhetoric at the same time that we are seeing, as always, an increase in mass incarceration and the cost to the state there. So I agree it's a mixed bag. We saw a longtime Bristol County sheriff in in Massachusetts, who's known as being a tough on crime candidate, lose to the Attleboro mayor. On the other side, we saw Mandela Barnes get hit really hard with ads about him being, easy on bail reform, letting criminals out of jail who let bad things happen in Wisconsin, and that seems to have hurt him there. There were accusations that some of those ads were racist.
Well, that one looked pretty bad as we were investigating, though. That the person who ran a bunch of people over at what was it? It was at a parade.
Yeah.
And was someone who had been released
previously done vehicular manslaughter, but had hit somebody with their car.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know that Mandela Barnes had anything to do with that.
Fine, but those things
stick
in voters' mind, and I don't think it's outrageous to be upset about that or to think that.
Right. That being something that is completely attenuated from what a candidate is actually advocating for is the issue with, I think, some of those ads. So I think the point that I am making is not that, of course, there are, people can feel different kinds of way about crime, and certainly crime is a concern for everybody. Nobody wants to be the victim of it. It's about what solution is best calibrated to meet it. But the idea that Democrats have to run fleeing in the opposite direction from something that a lot of their base wants, which is criminal justice reform, which is something that got 20 million people in the streets in the summer of 2020, I think has been really disproven. And especially the case of Kenneth Mejia, when you focus on the question of how much of this city's budget should we be putting into the police, a lot of voters are going to say that's too much money.
But there's a lot of things in the criminal justice reform bucket, right? I support getting rid of qualified immunity. I support, as does Rand Paul, getting rid of no-knock raids and kind of SWAT team style tactics as for serving, drug arrests. I don't even think we should do drug arrests. So there is broad popular consensus for a lot of those things. Or for police, how they treat people once they've arrested them, once they've detained them. That is the George Floyd, how they're treated in facilities. I think you can get bipartisan support for that. Then if we're expanding it even further into some of the stuff that went on, I think, for instance, in Philadelphia, where I think there is more of or you can point to more of a clearer correlation or causation between some of the quote-unquote soft on crime policies about who's getting not prosecuting enough people for gun arrests and things like that. There's more of those people on the street.
That's a big can of worms, Robby, to open at the end of a segment like this. I would dispute a lot there. We don't have time to get into that right now, but I'm glad there is some room for agreement here, and I think that it is setting us up for having more nuanced conversations about how to address policing in this country, and the results on Tuesday demand more nuance in that conversation. And I'm happy to be able to have it with you here. We'll have more Rising for you after this.